Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the third episode of Wolf School Season 2. My name is Chelsea and I work with the Raincoast Conservation Foundation. For those of you who have been tuning in over the past few weeks, welcome back. And for those of you who are newcomers, we're so happy to have you. And if you're interested in watching the first 2 episodes of this season, you can find the recording on Raincoast YouTube channel, which is where you're watching it from now, if you're watching it live. You can also find our first season of Wolf School on this channel or on our website. I'm just going to pop in the link there. So that's the web page that you can find the first season of Wolf School. We'll just give it about a minute to let people arrive and settle in. If you are calling in from YouTube, you can use the chat function to participate in this talk today. So as you sign in here, please let us know where you're calling in from. Perhaps whose ancestral territory you might be on right now. It's always really fun to see who we are reaching and where folks are calling in from. And I just want to say it's been really amazing to have so many people join us and participate over the course of this webinar series. So as we go along, please feel free to post questions in the chat function and we'll do our best to get to them. All right, well, we've got some folks in the audience. So we have New York, Michigan, Vancouver, Washington, Toronto, Alaska, Mexico, Colorado, Tennessee, UK. Awesome. So again, feel free to use the chat as you come in. But I think we're just going to get started here. So to everyone who's calling in here, welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Chelsea Greer. My family names have roots in England and Scotland, and as a settler, I just want to start by first expressing my gratitude and appreciation to be here working and living on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples. And today I'm hosting you from the shared territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam peoples, also known as the City of Vancouver. And so I also want to welcome everyone to make their own land acknowledgements in the chat box below. So I work for the Raincoast Conservation Foundation as director of our wolf conservation program, and this is the 3rd class of our 2nd season of Wolf School. So for those of you who are new to Raincoast, we are a charitable nonprofit organization made up of a team of scientists and conservationists who are empowered by our research to protect the lands, waters, and wildlife of coastal British Columbia in Canada. And I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who has supported our work over the years. And special thanks to those who have donated to our wolf program over the past few weeks. Your support is critical to our work and also making series like Wolf School possible. Your donations also help support our scientific research and allow us to deepen our understanding of these magnificent animals. Raincoast's work is very focused on the conservation of wolves in British Columbia. And so with this series and specifically our episode today, we really want to provide you with the opportunity to learn more about wolves and the great work that other organizations like the Wolf Conservation Center are doing for their protection. So again, audience members are tuning in today using YouTube. You can participate by entering any questions you might have into the chat on this platform, and I'll be monitoring the chat throughout the session, and I'll collect as many questions as I can to pose to our guest speaker after her presentation. And I just want to give a quick thank you to everyone who's been sharing information about Wolf School and to all of you who have emailed us with follow-up questions and comments. We really appreciate that as well. So Raincoast is running this Wolf School in collaboration with the Wolf Conservation Center, and we are beyond excited to have them join us again for another episode. This exact day, I believe, March 29th, happens to coincide with the 25th anniversary of the return of Mexican gray wolves to the wild. So we are extremely excited to be talking with the Wolf Conservation Center on this special day. So now it is my privilege to introduce our guest speaker today, Regan Downey. Regan is the Director of Education at the Wolf Conservation Center, where she has worked since 2015. And oversees on-site and off-site education programs. She leads the education team in the development of engaging and interactive conservation education lessons for individuals of all age and all learning abilities. Regan graduated from Providence College with a Bachelor of Science in Biology and a minor in Economics, and spent 3 years researching the mechanics of avian flight. So welcome, Regan.
Thank you so much, Chelsea, for having us.
Yeah, I wonder perhaps before we start your presentation, if you could share a little bit about how you went from researching avian flight to Director of Education at the Wolf Conservation Center.
Sure. So yes, I do have some experience studying birds and flight mechanics, but that was more of a way to get research experience. It was not a lifetime passion of mine. So wolves have always been the main goal, and birds, while they're amazing in and of themselves, they were more of a vessel to get closer to a career that I wanted. So yes, I've been here since 2015 and love every second of it. And I'm excited to share the wonder of the Wolf Center with everyone tonight.
Awesome, thanks. Well, we will dive into your presentation here. I'm gonna add it to the stream and I am just gonna pop off. So take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chelsea. And again, thank you to everyone for joining. As Chelsea said, my name is Regan Downey. I'm the Director of Education at the Wolf Conservation Center. My pronouns are she, her, and we are located in South Salem, New York, which is the land of the Munsee Lenape people. So for tonight, as Chelsea mentioned, we are so excited to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the return of Mexican gray wolves to the wild landscape. And throughout tonight's program, we're actually going to be discussing a bit more about the ethics of Mexican gray wolf recovery from a captive perspective. We know that wolves in the wild live very enriching, fulfilled lives. And the goal of centers like ours is to make sure we can match that wild lifestyle as best as we can in captivity. But sometimes there are challenges that arise when you're dealing with animals that are so social and intelligent, and they have emotions and feelings. When you're dealing with them in a captive environment, some challenges arise. So we'll be discussing those tonight. And then we will also be seeing some of the wolves that call the Wolf Conservation Center home. Now, for anyone who might be unfamiliar with the center, we do work to advance the survival of wolves by inspiring a global community through education, advocacy, research, and recovery. So we offer education programs, both on-site and off-site. We also offer virtual programs as well, but we also advocate on behalf of wolves. We give people tools to speak up for wolves and become more effective wolf advocates. We also sponsor and lead several research projects to advance wolf recovery across the country. And we also house and care for a variety of critically endangered wolves with the ultimate hopes of releasing these animals back into the wild. And through all of those different platforms, we are driven by three main values, which are community, respect, and passion. And hopefully all three of those will be visible tonight as we discuss wolves and the Wolf Conservation Center's work to recover them. In addition, we do have gray wolves that live at our center as well. So to better familiarize everyone with the Wolf Conservation Center, as I mentioned, we are located in South Salem, New York. So if you're looking at that map, we are that upper right pin, and we are located pretty far away from where wolves are actually released into the wild. So we have red wolves and Mexican gray wolves that live at our center. These are both endangered species that have recovery programs that are run by the federal government in coordination with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums and captive facilities like ours across the country. But the ultimate goal is to get wolves back into the wild. And so for red wolves, that would be releasing them into North Carolina. And Mexican gray wolves actually have two release areas. They can either be released into the Mexican gray wolf recovery area in Arizona and New Mexico. And there's also a separate release site in northern Mexico. And so our center works to get wolves back to their wild ancestral ranges. And just some quick numbers, you'll see on the right side of your screen, our center was founded in 1999, and we've been housing wolves since we were founded. And over the years, we have had over 120 wolves come through these grounds. Our goal is simply to be a pit stop on their journey. We would envision a world where we have no wolves here, because it means that they have really recovered in the wild and they've been able to live those fulfilling wild lives that we hope they so desperately have one day. We do also participate in those active release components. We've had 8 wolves released, and we also allow these wolves to kind of jump into the hearts and minds of a global audience because we have live streaming cameras on our website. So during today's program, we will journey up to our wolf enclosures. We'll potentially see some red wolves and Mexican gray wolves and our 2 ambassador gray wolves. But in case you're hoping to learn more about the rest of the wolves that live here, you can always visit our website and you can watch these wolves at any time of the day. I would recommend watching those cameras as we hit the end of April. We have 3 potential breeding pairs, which means we have 3 females that are potentially pregnant, which means they might be welcoming pups. And we've kind of narrowed down those due dates. And we believe late April is a good time of year to keep an eye on those cameras. But we couldn't do the work we do without our wonderful ambassador wolves who serve as educators. We'll talk more about these wolves as we head up to the enclosures because we'll actually see them. But these are 2 wolves that live at our center that are permanent residents. They will not be released into the wild. And that's because this type of wolf, these are kind of your generic gray wolves, they don't have a captive to wild reintroduction program. And so if a gray wolf like a Leo or Nakai, who are the wolves pictured on your screen, if a wolf like this is born in captivity, they legally cannot be released into the wild. There's no program for that. So in knowing that these wolves couldn't live in the wild, we offered them a safe home when they were puppies, and they serve as educators. So they help us teach a global audience about the important nature of wolves. They teach them that wolves are caring and loving, just like most humans, and that we should be working to protect and respect these wolves in the wild. But tonight's program is really interesting because we are here on a very exciting anniversary, that 25th anniversary of Mexican gray wolves returning to the wild. And we can celebrate their history and their growth, but we also have to acknowledge some of the challenges that these wolves have faced and continue to face as we are creating a world that is better suited for them than it currently is. So in terms of recovery efforts for Mexican gray wolves, Mexican gray wolves and wolves in general used to be quite wide-ranging in the United States. So gray wolves were once found everywhere that's shaded in gray, and red wolves occupied the southeastern US. And this picture map illustrates about 400 years ago in terms of wolf populations. And some studies estimate there were close to 250,000 wolves. However, at about the same time, there was a huge increase in the human population as European settlers were arriving, and they were killing wolves. And this pattern of killing wolves did cause their populations to drop. And so eventually, in the 1970s, wolves in this country were given Endangered Species Act protections. The Endangered Species Act, which coincidentally is celebrating a big anniversary this year, it's the 50th anniversary. The Endangered Species Act gives protections to imperiled plants and wildlife, and it sets in motion their recovery. And for wolves, this was crucial because it meant that there was no longer hunting and trapping. And we saw that gray wolves, red wolves, and Mexican gray wolves were all given separate protections under the ESA. Unfortunately, as many of us know, gray wolves did lose those protections in certain states. They did also lose them across the lower 48 states temporarily in 2021. Protections were reinstated for gray wolves across the lower 48 states last February, but wolves in certain states do still face challenges. Mexican gray wolves and red wolves, however, are listed separately, so they were not impacted by those delistings. And this is what we have with wolves today. So we see that wolf populations are relatively clustered. Gray wolves are found in the Pacific Northwest, ranging from Washington down to California. Gray wolves are also found in the Northern Rocky Mountains. They're living in Montana, Wyoming, Idaho. Colorado actually has a few wolves that migrated down naturally from Wyoming. And the state also is going to be reintroducing wolves technically by the end of 2023 as the result of a ballot initiative that was passed in 2020. There are also gray wolves living in the Western Great Lakes states. And then we have gray wolves living in the Southwest. Those are our Mexican gray wolves. Then we have red wolves living in the Southeast. And for tonight's program, we are going to be focusing on the Southwest. And that is because the Southwest is home to a current reintroduction program. Throughout the history of wolf recovery in the US, there have been 4 major reintroduction, relocation, reintroduction efforts, with the first being the release of red wolves into North Carolina in 1987. That was followed by everyone's favorite release, which was the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone in the mid-90s. But those 2 releases set in motion the release of Mexican gray wolves into Arizona and New Mexico in the late 1990s. So 25 years ago today. And it's been very exciting to watch that population grow. We currently have the highest population of Mexican gray wolves to date at 241 individuals in the US. It's a great improvement. It signals wonderful growth and great opportunities for Mexican gray wolves, but there are still some challenges that they face in terms of genetics and poaching. So we will hopefully see continued improvements over the next few years. But specifically, our center is involved with red wolves and Mexican gray wolves because we participate in a captive breeding program. So we have these red wolves and Mexican gray wolves that live here. We provide food for them. We have them live with their families. But the ultimate goal is release into the wild. So we participate with many other organizations across the country to get these wolves back into the wild. And with Mexican gray wolves, they do face, as I mentioned, a lot of challenges when it comes to genetics. And that primarily is because Mexican gray wolves were hunted virtually to extinction. They were declared extinct in the wild in the US, and there were 5 wolves left in northern Mexico. Those 5 were sent to the US to begin a captive breeding program. And only years later, thanks to advances in genetic testing, did scientists realize that there were actually 2 other pairs of pure Mexican gray wolves that had been living in captivity that whole time. So in total, all Mexican gray wolves that are alive today descend from 7 genetic founders. And that does create significant challenges when it comes to genetic diversity and creating a very robust and resilient population, which is what's needed for a species survival. And so genetic diversity is one of the primary focuses of these captive breeding programs. Wolves are paired for breeding in captivity based on genetics, based on lowest inbreeding coefficient. And while that does a wonderful job of increasing diversity, as you might imagine, it does create some problems because wolves in the wild don't pair based on genetics. They pair based on personalities and mate choice. Some wolves never breed. And so we're seeing that wolves in captivity, they are having their lives altered slightly simply from human influence. But also out of necessity because these wolves were hunted to extinction by people. Now that we have the technology, the knowledge that wolves are important to have, and also that it's important for wolves as individuals to be restored, we're able to help with recovery. And sometimes we have to think a little bit about how much of a role we are playing in recovery. And hopefully we'll get people thinking about that tonight. I certainly don't have any answers about it, but it is something that should be thought about as we are caring for these animals. And so this map just illustrates where Mexican gray wolves did once live. They were quite wide-ranging all across the Southwest into northern Mexico. But currently they are only found in the US, really in an area known as the Mexican wolf experimental population area. And so that's everywhere below Interstate 40, which is that orange and black line that cuts across the map. And Mexican gray wolves cannot go north of Interstate 40. If they do, they are captured and they are brought back below Interstate 40. That is an arbitrary boundary. There is no reason Mexican gray wolves can't go north of I-40. In fact, north of I-40 has ideal habitat for these wolves. And it's been identified as really crucial habitat in order for them to get closer to a full recovery. And then Mexico has a separate population in northern Mexico of about 45 individuals. Now, our center, as we mentioned, has released wolves into the wild. These are 2 of the 5 Mexican gray wolves we've released. And in total, the 5 we've released have all gone to relatively different locations, even though they're in the same area. But our first release was actually F838. She's the wolf you'll see in the top left. And you might be wondering about her name, F838. And that's where some of those considerations need to come into play, because F838 is known as an alphanumeric name. It's a letter followed by a number, and it serves to identify her as a female and is the 838th Mexican wolf that's been born since the Mexican Wolf Recovery Program started breeding these wolves in captivity decades ago. So it gives a lot of information about genetics, her place in the program, but it doesn't really give any information about her and who she is as an individual. And it doesn't really provide her with the respect that she deserves. And so you'll notice her sister, F836, who was released in 2008, she also has an alphanumeric number, and so does M1141. So all of these Mexican wolves born in captivity and born in the wild receive these alphanumeric names. It's a wonderful way, again, to identify them and communicate with recovery personnel. But we are also trying to connect people to these wolves. We're trying to build relationships and build respect and show that these wolves are thinking, feeling beings just like we are. And one simple way to do that is by giving them names. And so you'll notice our two most recent releases have names. They're also quite small. They were cross fosters. These are puppies that were actually taken from their birth families here and placed with wolves in the wild. And they were adopted and raised by those wolves. And they have names. So one of those cross fosters was Hope, cross fostered in 2019. And the other cross foster was Crumbo, cross fostered last year to New Mexico, to the Iron Creek Pack. And she's actually named after Kim Crumbo, a huge advocate for Mexican gray wolves who sadly passed away recently. And so Crumbo is named in honor of Kim. And these are wolves that really exemplify what we're trying to do here. We want these wolves to live in the wild because we know that a wild life is better in terms of fulfillment for a wolf. And so we push for every single wolf that can be released to be released. But sometimes that hits some challenges because not every wolf has the opportunity to be released. There aren't just blanket, numbers of wolves released every single year. There are certain requirements, there are certain restrictions, and that can create some tension with wolves that live in captivity. So to kind of make sure we're all on the same page, I imagine we are because we're all attending wolf school. But we know that wolves are social beings. They live in family groups known as packs. They rely on these families for comfort, for food, for safety. A wolf is a wolf when it is with its family. We also know that wolves are sentient beings. They have the ability to feel and perceive things. They have thoughts. We also know they have emotions and needs. They can experience fear and joy and sadness. And oftentimes, some people like to forget about this because it makes it easier to talk about wolves or any other animal because we can perceive them as being less than humans. But they really aren't. Wolves are just as important as we are. They live very similar lives to humans. And it's important to think about that because it allows us to remember that wolves are individuals. And that needs to be considered when we are talking about any type of captive recovery program. The needs of the individuals must be considered in addition to the needs of the species. So that last point is where we do get a little tense sometimes because we know that wolves were pushed to the brink of extinction because of human actions. Not the actions of us, but the actions of generations before us. And now that we have the technology to save these wolves, we obviously want to. We know it's great for ecosystem health. We know it's great for tourism dollars, and it's great for economic benefits. It's also great for these wolves to be living in the wild once again. But at what point are we maybe taking too much control? And again, this is nothing to say we have answers. It's just things to think about, because at what point, if at any point, does saving a species potentially harm an individual of that species? If we tend to forget that the individual matters just as much, are we negatively impacting that animal, even though we're saving the species as a whole? And so a really good quote that we like to use here at the Wolf Conservation Center is by Dr. Gordon Haber, who studied wolves in Alaska. And he said, "A wolf is a wolf when it's part of an intact, unexploited family group, capable of astonishingly beautiful and complex cooperative behaviors and unique traditions." Basically, a wolf is a wolf when it's part of its family and when it's able to do things that it would do in the wild, when it's able to explore, pass down knowledge. And unfortunately, with wolves in captivity, you don't always have the option to allow them to live as families because you have to think about space concerns. And wolves fight. And in the wild, they might fight, but they can disperse. They can leave their family. They can go find a new wolf to live with. And this is natural. Dispersal is how new packs are formed. It's how populations grow. But in captivity, when wolves are living behind fences and their choices are really made for them in terms of who they're living with, who they're breeding with, we don't always see that they have the ability to live as they would in the wild. And we have a large chunk of Mexican wolves living at our center. We have 18 living here at the moment. And these wolves are some who were born here. We have some wolves here who came to us from other facilities where they were born in captivity. We actually have a wolf who was born in the wild and came to live with us because he was removed for spending time near livestock. Unfortunately, rather than moving livestock off of national forest lands, Mexican gray wolves, a native species, are often removed instead, either through killing or through removal to captivity. But we have one wolf who I think tells a really important story. She was born here at our center in 2018. She recently left for good reasons. But through those years, she experienced excitement, sadness, heartbreak, a lot of emotions in a short chunk of time. And she really helps tell the story of sometimes sacrifices that wolves unknowingly make. They don't choose to make, but they make because they're part of a broader recovery program that is seeing long-term goals of species recovery and not necessarily thinking about wolves as individuals, which we understand can't always be done when you're thinking to prioritize the needs of the many over the needs of the few. So Mexican gray wolf Babs, who's on the lower left, is who we'll be talking about tonight. She actually left our center last Monday, a week and a half ago, to fly to Mexico, where she's going to meet a boy and hopefully pair up, get along well. And then ultimately, there's an exciting future waiting for her. So with Babs, we see that her story really spans a variety of emotions, highs and lows. She was born here at our center, and she really illustrates the challenges that we face when wolves are showing the desire to disperse, but they can't because of captive restrictions. So Babs was born here at our center in 2018. This is her puppy photo with her two brothers, Joe Darling and Crawl. We are quite creative with our names here. These three are actually named after Wolf Conservation Center volunteers. And Babs and her two brothers grew up. They were raised by their parents. They were kept away from people. As part of these recovery programs, these wolves stay elusive and shy. And she grew quickly. And the following year in 2019, she had a really exciting surprise because her parents had children again. And she was able to assume the role that is natural of older siblings in wolf families. She became a babysitter, and she was tasked with this important job by her mother. And she became everything for these pups. She helped raise them. She would guard them, play with them. And she became a second mother. And we really saw her personality come through. She was nurturing. She was loving. And it was a wonderful way to illustrate to a global audience the importance of multi-generational family units. It's how wolves learn. It's how siblings learn how to have children, how to raise puppies. It's crucial to wolf development and wolf survival. And this is what you would have in the wild. And as Babs grew, her siblings did as well. So this picture shows Babs and her family in 2020. Her mother, Trumpet, is laying down on top of this den structure in their enclosure here. This picture was actually taken from one of our cameras. And this family looks beautiful and resilient and strong, and they are, but they're also a family with adult children. And in the wild, you typically don't see a wolf family with this many adult children. It's hard to provide food for everyone, but tension is natural because some wolves, as they're growing up, they hit a breeding age, they're sexually mature, they decide they want to breed. and they have to leave their family to do that. They're not going to stay and breed with mom and dad, who are the leaders of their family. And so they set off on their own. And here, when we pair wolves for breeding season, we separate them, but we just do so with fences. So for example, Trumpet and her mate, Lighthawk, Babs's parents, were hopefully going to breed again that breeding season. And that meant Babs and her siblings couldn't be near them because we didn't want inadvertently Babs to breed with someone or someone else to breed with mom. And so the family was separated for a few months. And this is what's done with these captive breeding programs. It is the standard, and it's a good way to guarantee that the wolves you want to breed are going to breed. And then once breeding season is over, the family is brought back together, and it's usually a pretty seamless transition. However, Babs was showing us that she was ready to disperse. There was some friction with her family when they were all brought back together, and it didn't subside. And in the wild, Babs could simply walk away. It would be natural. She would head off. She would find a wolf. It would be a dangerous time until she found a wolf to live with, but it would be a natural thing for her to do. It would be exciting. It would be nerve-wracking, but she could do it. But we had to make that choice for her. And so Babs moved into a separate enclosure here at our center with the ultimate goal that eventually she would move to Mexico and she would meet a male at a captive facility there. And so she lived alone for a bit, and we were working with our cooperators in Mexico to make sure we could get the paperwork there so Babs could be transferred. And as you might imagine, transferring a wolf internationally can be quite hectic. And so we had everything underway. She was ready to go. And then paperwork fell through. And so she didn't have a chance to go. And so she was alone once again. And this time with no definite end in sight, because we had to wait until the following breeding season for her to potentially be transferred once again. And we knew this was uncomfortable for Babs. She howled a lot. And we are on 32 acres of land here, but howls travel very well. Babs howled consistently. She was separated from her family. She was sad. She was confused. She was lonely. Wolves are not meant to live alone if they don't want to. And so we were agonizing. We desperately wanted her to go. And luckily, we were able to make it work. And so in 2022, she was alone again. But in 2023, she was given the opportunity to leave. And so this picture was taken just last Monday as Babs was placed in a crate. And she was actually flown from New York down to Texas. And she was then driven across the U.S.-Mexico border by our friends who work at a captive facility in Mexico. And they were going to bring her to her new home. Luckily, we receive a lot of support with these wolves. We actually had 2 volunteer pilot organizations, Pilots to the Rescue and Lighthawk, who actually for the first time worked together in 2 separate trips to get Babs to her destination. And she flew in a very small plane. And so while it's exciting to think of her going to this new destination, it's also important to remember that while she's in that crate, she is terrified. She's never left her facility here. And then she was in a car. She was in several planes. She arrived in Texas, and it was a mix of our staff and U.S. Fish and Wildlife personnel and Mexican wildlife officials that had crossed the border as well. So it truly is a team effort, and it highlights how conservation is so team-oriented. And we need to also remember, though, that as we're celebrating the successes of the team, we're also acknowledging the stress of the wolf involved. So this is Babs, 2 different shots. You can tell how stressed she is, how scared she is. This is a new experience for her. If anything, it's helping to reinforce that humans are not great, humans are dangerous, and she should stay away from them, which is good for the wild. But it really makes you pause and think, is it worth it? And we believe it is, because we understand the stress she's going through. We understand how scary it is. But the end goal is to get her to Mexico. And after that, she'll actually be released into the wild. And that's the ultimate goal of this program. So while there are ups and downs and highs and lows, and sometimes, you wonder, is this the best life for these wolves? We know a captive life is not. We're very transparent with that. We think we give them the best life we can. They're eating wild prey here. We feed these wolves roadkill deer. They, for the most part, live with their families. But the ultimate goal is exactly what awaits Babs, and that is a wild life. And so this picture on the screen is not Bab. She's not been released yet. This was actually one of our Mexican gray wolves who released to he was released to Mexico as well. And his sister still lives here. Her name is Rosa. She is turning 15 this spring, and she was born here in 2008 on Earth Day, and she has not left. And so we see that while some wolves get the chance, others don't. And it's always a really crucial reminder for us that we shouldn't take these releases for granted, but they shouldn't be so few and far between. Especially on today's anniversary, we need to remember that all wolves deserve the chance to be wild. And right now, the US is only releasing puppies, not adults, through cross fosters. And we think every wolf, regardless of age, if they're healthy and able to live in the wild, they really should have the opportunity. So it's something to think about as we celebrate success and as we acknowledge 25 years of a growing population. There are still over 300 wolves in captivity that deserve the same opportunity to be wild. But we are now actually going to see some wolves. So we're actually going to start to make our way up to our, what we call our enclosure area. My colleague Hannah is currently up there with a camera, and I'll be joining you to talk more about our ambassador wolves. And then fingers crossed, we'll see if we can spot any Mexican gray wolves as well. So Chelsea, if you wanna hop back on, switch the camera over to Hannah, I'll make my way up and I'll see you all shortly.
Okay, great. Thanks, Regan. Okay, so just give me a moment. We're gonna switch over here. Perfect. Okay, hello, Hannah.
Hi there. Trying to see if we can get Nakai over here, who's kind of hanging out. Not quite focusing. There's a Lewa there in the corner.
Okay, everyone. So we are up here at our wolf enclosures. You'll notice you'll see a lot of fence behind me. And I will say, of course, fences are necessary for a captive population. I know it can be a bit jarring, though, because we don't like seeing fences. For sure, the wolves don't like seeing fences. I will also say it's the start of spring. We've not yet had our spring bloom. Usually it's much more green, and it does have a very wild sense to it. But one of our ambassador wolves is actually sleeping at the moment, and she's very close and very visible. So we're actually going to make our way over to say hi to her. Her name is Alewa. Alewa is a gray wolf, and she is turning 12 in April. Her birthday is April 20th. So if anyone shares a birthday, keep that in mind. But Alewa lives here with her younger brother, Nakai. You'll see him moving around as well. Nakai is quite excited to have a camera up here. Nakai is, you'll see some growling as well. Nakai is 8 years old.
No, it looks like we're having
February,
a little bit of...
and their gestation period is 63 days. So we see that pups are typically born in the early spring as well. So if we come over here, you'll notice that Alewa and Nakai are looking very blonde. This is their color. Even though these wolves are gray wolves don't actually have to be gray. They can be black, brown, white, tan, a mix of those colors. But these wolves really exemplify the good size of a wolf. They help people better understand that wolves aren't these huge hulking creatures that weigh 200, 300 pounds. They're a bit smaller, maybe weighing up to 120 or 140 pounds. Alewa here is in the 70s in terms of her weight, and she is a great representative for her wild kin. Through Alewa, people are better able to understand how wolves communicate with each other, how they function, how they connect as a family. And Alewa really helps many people kind of do away with a lot of the information they thought they knew about wolves, thinking wolves are these scary animals. Because with Alewa, who's resting so peacefully on this hot spring day, I say hot, I am wearing a winter jacket, but for the wolves here, it is warm. They have their undercoats on right now. And when a gray wolf like Alewa has her undercoat fully grown, which she starts to grow in the fall, she's actually ready for negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's about 50 degrees Fahrenheit here. So she's pretty toasty, but she's going to keep herself cool and she's going to rest. And luckily her enclosure here, which is about 2 acres in size, does give her ample opportunity to stay cool. She can swim. She can rest in her den. She has 2 dens actually. So she has many opportunities, and she's instead choosing to rest in the dirt, which is smart for her. I don't think we would actually do that though. So we're also going to shift up to where Nakai, Alewa's brother, is resting. Nakai is very energetic, he's very exciting, and he loves to play. And luckily, he has a sibling with whom he can play, but he also has a very large enclosure here as well. And that's a priority for us. We want these wolves to feel as though they are wild. And even though these ambassador wolves cannot live in the wild, giving them an enclosure that's quite expansive is a great way to help them feel as though they are wild. And as a gray wolf, we mentioned these wolves cannot be released into the wild. And it's really for a very basic reason. There's no captive to wild release program for these types of gray wolves. So while we understand that, yes, it would be so exciting to see Nakai in the wild, to see Alewa in the wild, there's simply no program that does that. And so with knowing that, when these wolves were born out in Nevada as puppies, we thought, you know what? Sometimes people need to see an animal to feel better connected to it. They need to feel a bit more inspired. They need to have a moment where they see that animal. Because we do still tend to struggle with empathy and compassion when it comes to protecting and saving wild creatures. And so by having ambassador wolves and giving them a great life, we're also helping the public better connect to their wild kin as well. And these wolves are seen by visitors, they're seen on their cameras, but because we also have wolves that live here that might not be seen by the public, having ambassador wolves is a wonderful way to better explain red wolves and Mexican gray wolves as well. Because the primary goal of those wolves is not to be seen by the public, it's to stay as wild as possible and ultimately be released into the wild. So being mindful of time and knowing that we might have questions that are going to be asked as well, we're actually going to move up to our endangered species facility. That's where our red wolves and Mexican gray wolves live. And we're going to see if we can spot any. Usually when we have people on site, the wolves stay away because they hear kids, they hear people for programs, and they don't want to come out. But because tonight no one else is here and it's just me and Hannah, we're going to keep our fingers crossed and see if maybe someone would like to come out. So we're going to make our way up to our endangered species area. And as we're walking and transitioning away from these wolves, just a reminder, if you do have questions, feel free, or comments, feel free to put them in the chat, and visit our website as well. If you have more questions about Alewa and Nakai, we also offer adoption programs. So if you'd like to sponsor Alewa or Nakai, you can do so, and you'll receive periodic updates about these wolves and learn more about them as well. But we're going to head up this way.
Regan, I guess while we're making our way over there, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about where Alewa and Nakai came from.
Sure. So Alewa and Nakai were born in captivity in Nevada, and they were born at a captive breeding center. So our center here, we don't breed our captive gray wolves. So Alewa and Nakai are spayed and neutered. They cannot breed. Other centers do breed their ambassador wolves. And when our center was first founded in 1999, we did have 3 ambassador wolves. Their names facing a bit of a challenge. 3 of our ambassadors had passed away, and we had 1 ambassador left. His name was Atka, and he was an Arctic gray wolf. And he wasn't always visible. So we knew that in order to continue to reach people, it might be best to have more ambassador wolves. And I say that, and it sounds like a very quick and kind of almost like thoughtless response, but it is a very serious decision that we make. If it is ever time for us to get an ambassador wolf, we always weigh the pros and the cons. We understand that even though we're not breeding these wolves here, by getting a wolf from somewhere else in captivity, we're essentially showing our desire for more captive wolves to be born into a captive life. But we do also know that these wolves are already born and they need a place to live. We give them a great life here, but they also make the world that much better because so many people are able to fall in love with wolves because of them. And that's really our goal. We receive so many messages from people who love Nakai, they love Alewa. If someone seems injured one day, we're flooded with messages asking if they're okay. And it's really great to see so many people care about an animal they've never, ever, ever met and might never. And we hope that that love and that compassion transfers over to wild wolves as well. So that's how we got those wolves here. They came as puppies and they were actually raised by us. So we had a team of pup nannies that helped socialize these wolves and help them learn a bit more kind of about how to be used to people and what to do. So they are socialized. They're not tame. They're not domesticated. They're still wild in their behaviors. But if they see people coming up, they're usually quite curious. They do also know that usually humans mean they're getting snacks, they're getting food. But now we're in our endangered species area. And you'll notice, unlike when we came up to Alewa and Nakai, who were very visible, we're not really seeing any wolves right now. And that's actually perfect because in order for red wolves and Mexican gray wolves to be released into the wild, they have to show fear of humans. And so if these wolves were coming out when we had 40, 50 people here every single day, it might be a little alarming. But if these wolves are just moving about normally and naturally and they're kind of investigating on their own, that's perfectly fine. Wolves by nature are quite curious. And so it's a great way to highlight their personalities and talk about them and better connect people to those wild wolves as well. And so the enclosure we just passed that doesn't seem to show any movement is home to two red wolves. Their names are Tyke and Lava. Their webcams are streaming on our website, and they are a potential breeding pair. We saw breeding behavior from these wolves earlier this winter, and we are hoping that pups will be born end of April. Lava, the female, actually did give birth to at least one pup last year. Unfortunately, that pup did not survive. It's very sad for us, for Lava, for Tyke, her mate, and for red wolves as well, because with a population that's so low, there are only 14 red wolves known to remain in the wild. Every pup, every wolf is important. So it's certainly a tragedy when one passes away. But we also have to remember that while we're sad, Lava and Tyke lost a family member and they were mourning, they were grieving as well. So it was a tough time. We are hoping that this spring we have more pups born to them. We also have another red wolf breeding pair that might have pups. And we have a Mexican gray wolf pair, Trumpet and Lighthawk, that might be welcoming pups as well. But now we are up here at our Mexican gray wolf enclosure, and we're actually gonna step over just a bit. And we're gonna kind of post ourselves here and see if perhaps one of our Mexican gray wolves named Valentia might, as she's moving about doing her natural evening routine, we're gonna see if she might start to be slightly visible. But while we're standing here, Chelsea, I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Yeah, there's lots of questions coming through. One that I thought was really great in terms of just how wolves raised in captivity, how do they learn to survive in the wild once released?
That's a great question. So we're not actually too concerned about wolves when it comes to hunting in terms of survival. Wolves have those natural instincts, just like your dogs and cats do. You know, they see a squirrel or a chipmunk in the yard, they're going to chase it. Wolves do the same thing. We do kind of help the wolves by making sure they're eating a wild diet. So they're eating the prey they would find in the wild. We feed our wolves here roadkill deer that we actually collect from the surrounding streets. It's a great way for the public to support and get involved, but it's also a great way to give wolves a natural prey source. Studies have shown that by giving wolves natural prey, you're creating better gut environment. So they're healthier, their gut biome is better and more closely, more similar to wild wolves. But by giving the wolves native prey as well, we're also making sure they're not being released into the wild with a predisposition to eating cattle or pigs. So for example, Mexican gray wolves, where they live in the Southwest, they share the landscape with livestock. And so they're encountering cows, and these cows often are grazing unattended. And so they are very easy for wolves to catch because they're also displacing native wildlife. And if we were to feed wolves beef here, they're going to go after beef in the wild. So we want them to have animals they can safely find. But one of our Mexican gray wolves who we released, we mentioned her earlier, her name was F838. She killed, she and her family were released, her mate and their 2 puppies, and they killed an elk within 3 weeks of being released into the wild. It was picked up by trail camera images. So we know they can do it. They might not be excellent at it, but they're good enough to survive. Great question. And we're going to move up here.
Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. And in terms of like, do you have any indication, or I guess the monitoring that happens after release? Are there numbers for the released wolves that have survived? Because this question asker was commenting on, knowing that there's thought that some of the wolves that have been released may have been killed by cars. So is there kind of an updated number in terms of how many are still around?
Great question. So there are a lot of Mexican gray wolves that have been released into the wild since the recovery effort began back in the late 1990s. And yes, there are updates as to which wolves have survived, which wolves have not. There's actually a really good resource for the public if anyone's interested. Arizona Game and Fish Department, which is one of the agencies involved with Mexican wolf recovery, they send out quarterly wild reports. So quarterly Mexican gray wolf reports. Anyone can sign up. You just need your email address. And they send you updates about wolves in the wild. They do a breakdown by location. So Arizona, New Mexico, and then the Fair, which is Fort Apache Indian Reservation. And they will break down family groups or packs and updates. So they will tell you what is happening with wolves. So that's a great resource that anyone has access to. There's also something in the captive world called a stud book. And a stud book is where every single wolf that's been born since those first 7 is listed. So we know their current location. If they've passed away, it's noted when they passed away and where. So yes, there are records of every single wolf that's gone through this program, captive and wild. Some wild wolves, if they're born in the wild, they might never actually be known, because if they're not ever captured and collared by the Mexican wolf interagency field team, we just don't know that they're out there. Right now, with those 241 wolves in the wild, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service estimates that about 50% of the population is collared. So not every wolf that is living in the wild is actually known via a tracking collar. But in terms of the wolves we've released into the wild, our statistics, meaning just in terms of the wolves going, not that great. So we've released 5 wolves into the wild, 3 adults and 2 puppies. And the 3 adults were killed by humans. So the wolves themselves did nothing wrong. I think it's very important to note when we talk about wildlife, human wildlife conflict, very rarely is it something that the animal did. It's usually caused by humans. F838, that first wolf we killed, we released, I'm so sorry, she was shot and killed. Her sister, F836, who was released 2 years later, she was also shot, and her body was actually found dumped alongside of a highway. And then the male adult we released into Mexico a few years ago, he was what the term is lost to follow-up. So he just kind of disappeared. And it's believed that he was poisoned. The 2 pups we cross-fostered, they have not been collared yet. Puppies are not released with a tracking device. So we'll just have to see if they're captured and collared in the future. So while it's not always a great outcome in terms of long life in the wild, we also need to remember that the lifespan of a wolf living in the wild is much shorter than it would be in captivity, because they're not facing the same challenges in captivity that they do in the wild. But we do also need to remember that humans are the leading cause of wolf mortality. And so humans are significant threats to wolves. And by doing outreach in communities and raising awareness for wolves, we're trying to make the wild a bit better and a bit safer, because we know the wild is still best for wolves. So we know it's somewhat of a bittersweet ending sometimes, but even for those wolves, imagine the excitement and the freedom they must feel when they're in the wild. You know, they're coming from a fenced in area, they're coming from a crate, and then all of a sudden there's just an open expanse in front of them. And it must be the most beautiful, terrifying thing for them, but it's what they deserve. They deserve the chance to be wild. So we know there's a risk, but we think a risk is much better if we know that if it works out, it's going to be the best life possible.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that, Regan. And I wonder, this is a question that I'm really interested in. There's a bit of a theme in the comment section too, because I know you talked a little bit about pairing wolves based on genetic diversity, and also how in the wild they might pair together based on personality. And I wonder if personality comes into play at all within the process of deciding which wolves are placed within the endangered species area and who are going to be released. Because, you know, there's studies on other wildlife, elephants, kangaroo rats, that personality can play a huge factor in the success of reintroduction programs, whether it be their curious nature, their willingness to explore new environments. And so I wonder if that is a factor in the Wolf Conservation Center.
That's a great question. So yes, wolves, you can leave that, Hannah. So wolves, when it comes to deciding who gets to be released, personality doesn't really play into it. It's more so personality in the sense that, is this wolf afraid of humans? And so that's really the biggest behavioral aspect. And as long as a wolf is showing signs of being fearful of humans, then that's a really good quality. But other than that, other personalities aren't always taken into consideration. Whether a wolf is playful with their siblings, something like that might not be considered a top priority. But with wolves in the wild as well, they are able to decide if they want to breed. So not every wolf in the wild will breed. They might decide to stay with their families, raise children, raise their younger siblings. But in captivity, because we face a population that is so genetically imperiled, wolves are paired for breeding and selected for breeding based on their genetic value. And we say genetic value strictly meaning lowest inbreeding coefficient. We understand that value is not strictly genetic. Wolves have value to themselves, their families, to us. So we're not saying it in that kind of very narrow sense of the word, but wolves are paired with each other if they are considered to be a pairing that would increase the diversity of the population, or at least wouldn't make it worse. And so you might pair two wolves that have a really good match on paper, and they meet in person and it's just not the same. So think about, like, if you're paired on a blind date, or if you are meeting someone for the first time, everything on paper might look great, but you meet that person and you're like, you know what? No, it's not going to work. And so in the wild, if wolves encounter a wolf that they don't want to live with, they keep moving, they keep wandering, they find someone else. But with wolves in captivity, sometimes we see that they might not really like the other wolf they live with. And you can tell because they're not spending time together. They're doing things on their own. And sometimes hormones take over in breeding season and they do actually produce pups together, and pups tend to really unite a family, bring them stronger together. But even one of our red wolf pairs, Tyke and Lava, they've been together for going on 4 years. And I can tell you, for those first 2 years, they were kind of strictly in the friend zone. They were not really showing interest in each other beyond a roommate or a companion capacity. So personality can certainly play a role, because you can pair wolves. Doesn't actually mean they're going to like each other. Doesn't actually mean they're going to breed. So mate choice would really be great if it could work in captivity, if you could let wolves pair with wolves they want to live with, because you might also see an increase in reproduction as well. There might be a higher success rate when it comes to having pups.
Okay, awesome. Well, we're coming to the last minute, and I just want to give you a moment to, maybe is there anything that you can tell our audience members how they can support this wolf work? And if there is something that maybe you wanted to share, if there's anything in this enclosure or a final note to our audience members that are watching.
Sure. So today we really focused a lot on Mexican gray wolves. And rightly so. They deserve to celebrate their anniversary. But it's a good reminder that wolf recovery is really about national and international cooperation, people getting together and speaking up. It really is something that requires everyone. Wolf recovery isn't just isolated to people living in a certain state, a certain country, a certain city. And so even though many of you joining most likely don't live in Arizona or New Mexico or Northern Mexico, I don't. We live here in New York. Wolves belong to all of us, and it's really important that we're using our passion and our love of wolves and our appreciation of their ecological roles to really advocate on their behalf, whether it's contacting state wildlife agencies or federal wildlife agencies and pushing for releases of adults or better genetic measurements for success in the wild. It's really about people speaking up for wolves and understanding that we are really their voices. So I certainly recommend people to visit our website to learn more about ways they can support wolf recovery in the US. Our website is nywolf.org. But there are also many other wonderful groups celebrating Lobo Week this week. So you're more than welcome to follow us on social media and use the Lobo Week hashtag and look for the other organizations that are celebrating as well. Because as we said, wolf recovery really is a national and international movement. And so it's been wonderful this week to see the outpouring of support and love from other communities, other organizations that have wolves as well. And it looks like our beautiful Mexican gray wolf in here, Valentia, is not really deciding to make an appearance. I was hoping she might be visible slightly during tonight's program, but you know what? She is showing that her personality, her desires tonight are just not to be visible. And so we respect that as an individual. She is visible on our streaming webcams, meaning when she is visible. But she is most likely just enjoying a nice rest somewhere in her spacious enclosure. And we are glad that she is choosing to stay where she is and have fun. But we have wonderful videos and pictures of her on our website. But we also, of course, want to thank everyone for joining us tonight and for supporting Wolf School. And we, of course, want to thank Raincoast for once again including us in this wonderful opportunity to connect people to wolves in a variety of ways. It's always very informative and we love participating. So thank you, Chelsea.
Yeah, thank you so much, Regan. And I just want to thank all of our audience members for taking the time to join us tonight. There's been a lot of engagement, a lot of questions coming through, and I'm sorry to anyone that I did not get to your question, but feel free to reach out to the Wolf Conservation Center or to Raincoast to follow up on any of your questions. And I just want to thank you, Regan, for all the time that and effort you've put into tonight. And it was truly amazing to meet some of the ambassador wolves today. And again, if you're interested in learning more about wolf conservation, please stay tuned for the rest of the series. Next week, we'll be joined by international canid specialist, Dr. Shelley Alexander, to talk about the conservation of wolves and coyotes and ethical considerations in research. And again, you can visit the Wolf Conservation Center in person or at their website or at Raincoast's website at raincoast.org to find out more information about wolves. And yeah, with that, I feel like you said some beautiful things to end this off, but I want to give you one more chance to kind of leave us with a final note on wolves, Regan.
Sure. Yeah, I think maybe like a final thing to note, and I think it's just very obvious from everyone who's asking all of the questions today and partaking in Wolf School, is just that clearly there's a very passionate audience for wolves and wolf recovery and wolf conservation. So while it's wonderful that Raincoast hosts this, and hopefully we'll have many more years of Wolf School to come, we should take that newfound knowledge, the newfound passion, and continue to be very vocal wolf advocates every other week throughout the year, not just Lobo Week, not just during Wolf School. So if anything, we have a newfound audience and team members to make the fight even stronger. So hopefully we'll see more of you, whether it's online or in person, and hopefully Raincoast will as well. So thank you all so much, and thank you for supporting wolves.
Great. Thank you again, and thank you to our audience. We're going to sign off now, but everyone have a great evening and a great Lobo week. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.